Section 3 in a moment. We'll get through a couple of the other ones. The acts and transactions, the director, there were certain individuals that brought us to the stage, so we're ratifying that. The only real substantive activity that's taking place today is to prepare the organizational minutes that you're looking at now, and to put a basic, and you'll see a copy of it, application to the Dormitory Authority of the State of New York for funding under that $24 million grant, hold that grant. All right, we talked about Section 6, that's your bank. Section 7, you're asking them to go ahead and get the EIN number, which we've obtained for you.
Just one quick question about the grant from the dormitory grant. Will there be any requirements for us to get that money? Are they put any stipulations?
No, none at this point.
Okay.
Section 8, the president, with the assistance of the director and other officers hereby directed to develop a budget. Again, that's something by statute we'll have to file by November 1. We'll do that at a subsequent meeting.
I have one other question.
Yeah.
So are we limited to just that $24 million grant, or, I mean, I know there was another $10 million out there that's not going through this entity, but it could, depending on how things change, but if there are other grants out there, I mean, are we a conduit for that? Usually in board resolutions, doesn't it allow us to do
if the board chooses to expand your purposes right now are basically to relieve the burden of government in Yonkers and assist in economic development type projects. The primary one we've identified is drawdown and use of the $24 million grant. I think at some point we're going to have to be a little careful not to get into other peripheral things that could get us financially into difficulty.
Section 5, residents including but not limited to applying for 24 million grants. We have that flexibility, but we consistently show us that we corporate change.
Now you're going to see a series of resolutions now. I think it's 8 through 19. I'm sorry, 8 through 18. That are all based on complying with the Public Authority Accountability Act. That act was passed in 2005 and requires entities like this. And there may have been arguments that you weren't subject to it, but Dennis and I conferred and want to make you subject to this form of open governments. So the Public Authority Accountability Act requires that you file a budget. That's Section 8. And again, that's by November 1. You'll see in Section 9, it repeats what I mentioned to you earlier. There are certain officers who cannot be on the board of directors. They're the CEO and the CFO. That's why we took that action earlier. Section 10, there's a state-approved training course that all members are supposed to participate in within 1 year. We've been providing it here in Yonkers to get all the board members caught up who sit on the IDA or otherwise. So that's usually, it's not been a problem.
Sean's office is certified to give that, so we can actually give it at the beginning of and the end of the board meeting or during the board meeting.
Do we get CLE credit?
Yeah, we're trying. Section 11, all members of the board participate in continuing training. That's a concept that's in the statute they haven't really developed yet. If you go through the initial one, you're fine at this point, but we anticipate more updates at future meetings. Section 12, all board members should file an annual financial disclosure statement. The statement is up to the Local Development Corporation to adopt, and you'll see in a few, actually if you go to Exhibit D, 4 out of 5 of you already file a form of disclosure with the city. What we've been doing with the clients is we have this multiple obligation. Now you're in a different entity. If you see, we have a really basic form of disclosure in Exhibit D. The things that would be most relevant to us are what companies you get directors on or officers on in case we try to do business with one of those entities. The much deeper disclosure you do for the city council and for city employment is not relevant here and not necessary here.
I'm getting back to do you have anything to spend with me? Oh yes, Section 12. Will there be board insurance?
Director's liability.
D&O, I generally recommend it. I mean, on a not-for-profit, just so you're aware, there are special protections in statute that you have to rise to a certain level, almost of intentional activity. It's a not-for-profit matter, but you don't always want to just rely on that safety net. And 2, this entity we anticipate you only taking actions based on advice of counsel. There's very good common law protections for you on that your counsel suggested to you that should help. But number 3, and especially with Mr. Spicer here on the board, it is not protected by some of the indemnities that you would all enjoy with the city. We would normally recommend D&O policy. We'll get one for the next meeting before you take any substantive actions beyond organizational.
So next meeting.
Next meeting.
But your point is that the 4 of us are actually covered by the city's
City.
indemnification. Although the city self-insures, so if the D&O covers us, that actually would save the city.
It never hurts to have the D&O, sometimes it's surplus, sometimes it's necessary.
And it's a little unfair for the independent members not to have a similar layer of protection. All right, section 13, there'll be an audit committee formed. Now, oddly enough, with these type of entities, only the independent members can sit on the audit committee and the governance committee. We only have one independent.
Great. I was just going to volunteer for that.
You could have your committee meeting on your way home. You have to post notice when you leave your side. When you shave, you have to post notice.
At a subsequent meeting, we'll sit with Michael just prior to it and walk him through a governance committee meeting and an audit committee, so we have minutes for that. And there's actually a charter they want you to adopt. This is somewhat of an evolving field because the ABO is kind of throwing best practices in on top of the statutory requirements.
The problem with best practices is that it's not defined just by saying the best practices. It's kind of for us to identify and recommend to you best practices. That's the amorphous concept. We'll deal with this.
In terms of the accountant and the accountant firm, will we all have to review these?
These committees do not have separate authority, they only have the ability to recommend. So any retention of auditing firm is a result of Michael's recommendation.
The board has
Section 15, just within 90 days at the end of the fiscal year, we're supposed to file a report. Now remember, there's a budget 60 days before the end of your fiscal year ends, so that's November 1st. And then there's a report 90 days after the end. So in March, we're going to use a calendar year. That may or may not have audited financial statements, but and that's one of the quirks they haven't really worked out here. But just so you can see it coming, the staff will prepare that at the end of the year. We anticipate that at that time accounting for, I hope the lion's share of the $24 million in how it was spent. All right, section 16. Corporation submit to the Treasury of the County, the Board of Supervisors, the corporation's budget for fiscal year. There's a typo in there.
What's the Board of Supervisors?
That's 2 typos. I missed both those. What's my fault? Year ending 2000.
Can you explain G to me? Can you go back? Can you explain item G?
Item G in section 15.
Yes.
And when we go to file that report by next March 31/09, the state wants you to describe any real estate you own and the value of that real estate. And right now it's nothing, but by then it should be the properties we purchased with the grant.
And you anticipate 15,000?
no, that's
In excess.
in excess of.
Oh,
That's the
When you do
statute.
have a small piece of property, you report each of the,
anything above that? And we're going to report that by March of 2009.
You'd have to record it by then, but I mean, action would be taken in a board meeting, so it would be public.
All right. In section 16, there's 2 typos. Again, these are drafts, and the third line should refer to county legislature, and the last line should be 2009. And again, what'll be a finalized set, again, we haven't asked for your vote, we're just going to summarize in each of the resolutions.
No, wait a second.